Hey everybody, this is CORSAIR. We're here and I'm George. This is the Upgrade Time live stream. So we're going to talk a little bit about why right now is an incredible time to upgrade your PC or to buy a PC. We're not going to announce any new products or anything really crazy today, so don't, sorry to burst your bubble on that, but we are going to answer some questions about what you should build, why you should build it, and what you should get to put in that system when you do build it. So let's go ahead and start by introducing everybody on the call. Let's go ahead and start with our special guests. Gordon, why don't you start first?
Hey all, Gordon Ung with PC World. Welcome to the internet.
And Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg from the channel Greg, and I do PC stuff.
Yeah, Greg Salazar on YouTube, for those of you guys who don't know, and Gordon is the senior editor of PC World, or executive editor, sorry, of PC World.
It's all right. It's all the same. Just titles, meaningless.
Editor más grande. And then Chris, obviously. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a senior tech marketing specialist at CORSAIR. I work with George building PCs and stuff.
So Chris is going to be kind of reading off some questions from the chat and interrupting and letting us know when you guys had a question that we aren't answering ahead of time. But let's get started. So my hypothesis, my thesis statement today is this is the best time to upgrade your PC in years because a lot of things have just been released and they're all really, really good and big improvements over last gen. Do you agree or disagree? Gordon?
Yes, everything is dropped. All the cards are on the table, and anybody that is waiting to upgrade, you might as well just quit. Go buy one of those new M1 Max.
Thanks, Gordon. I guess that wraps up the stream. Let's call it a day. Okay. Greg, what do you think?
I think that it's definitely it's a hot time to buy, and you're getting a lot of bang for your buck now, especially in the higher tier. Higher tier last year was upwards of $1,000, and higher tier this year, with the exclusion of the BF GPU from Team Green, is it's well under $1,000. So much more attainable now for pretty sweet performance. Same on the CPU side. AMD's been chugging along. Intel, they'll get there hopefully soon. But it's still a good time. I mean, inventory levels aside, if you're looking to upgrade, I'm sure this stuff looks super enticing.
Yeah, so let's talk about CPUs first. I think CPUs are the thing that people have been really paying attention to lately. We've seen the Ryzen 5000 series stuff showed up beginning of this month. You started to see inventory show up a little bit. But there's a big difference between Ryzen 5000 and 3000 series. So Alan, if you want to bring up some of the architecture overviews, let's talk a little bit about this. Gordon, this is from one of your guys' articles on PC World, and we can show some of the differences between the Zen 2 and Zen 3 architecture and talk a little bit about what the benefits are of going to the new Zen 3 architecture. Do you want to start kind of going over a little bit of it, Gordon?
Yeah, so the high-level view is, this is really a new core in a lot of ways. They basically said they did a grounds-up redesign, obviously better IPC, improved integer performance, improved floating point, and one of I think the things that's really helped them and the things that's dear to heart for most of us is gaming performance with huge steps in reducing latency because their base unit previously was a 4-core CCX. It is now an 8-core CCX. That means all 8 cores basically share 32 megs of cache. Before, I sort of like to use the analogy of an 8-core Ryzen that you had was sort of like a duplex where you had 4 units on one side and 4 units on the other side. If you wanted to get something from your neighbor next door, you had to go down the hallway, down the stairs, around the walkway, back up, get it from them, come back around. It was a really long trip. And these new, Ryzen 5000s are very much like, a unit with just base 8. So now if you need something from your neighbor, you just walk down the hall, get it, and go back to your place, right?
Nice. One of the other things I kind of like to see is the cache organization change. So Alan, if you can bring up the cache image, I think it's really an important message to say, we got up to what AMD claimed was a 19% improvement on IPC. I think part of that has to come from this. What do you think, Gordon?
Yeah, I agree. They really, of course, remember they were calling it game cache before because they had very sizable cache. They said it was essentially, they attribute a lot of their game performance just to that cache, just that much larger cache, the loss, less latency between the cores. But, really their quote to everybody when they briefed everyone, as Greg remembers probably, is they said, it was eye-opening how much that huge L3 cache made in gaming.
Yeah. What do you think, Greg? Have you been playing around with this at all, or reading some benchmarks?
Yeah, I mean, from an architectural, I'm not obviously like someone who deep dives heavy into this stuff, but I know that the core-to-core latency reduction played a huge role in improving frame rates across the board. And that was the one kind of Achilles heel of the Zen architecture. See, Intel has the ring bus, and through the ring bus, latencies are super, like, phenomenally low by comparison. If you compare it, especially the original Zen architecture, but by unifying the cache and unifying that CCX into a full 8-core cluster, so that cores don't need to traverse the infinity fabric to communicate between each other, you're reducing latency across the board. And in games that are especially being leveraged, leveraging 4, 6, 8 threads or more, that's where that latency really starts to catch up with you, and the CPU starts to hold things back. So it's great to see that they're pretty much either on a level playing field in some games or exceeding what we've come to expect from Intel. It's kind of surreal. I mean, just because we've been so used to Team Blue being ahead in the gaming sphere, it's refreshing to say the least.
I like that traverse the infinity fabric phrase. I think that's what I'm going to name my first album if I ever learn how to play an instrument. So I think that the CPU side for Ryzen is really solid. I think that the case can be made right now that the best CPU you could buy for gaming or for any purpose is a Zen 3 processor. I mean, it depends a lot on your use case and what you have going on and all the hardware in your system, but I think Zen 3 is a really tough competitor right now.
I'd agree with you, George. And, you're an old timer like me, so we remember the day when it was hands down, no excuses, AMD ran everything. So this Zen 3, these Ryzen 5000s, they run the board on everything. High core count, really great IPC, single-threaded performance, and gaming. Really, that's been like Athlon FX. There was a point where you didn't want, Intel, and you only wanted AMD. You could arguably make that for AMD for a lot of use cases over the last few generations, but this chip you'd really have to stretch to want an Intel part at this point.
Yeah, I think if you didn't already have the motherboard or something, and you had to buy a new motherboard and a new CPU anyway, then Zen 3 is a no-brainer, really. The real question for you, Greg and Gordon, if I have a Zen 2 right now, if I have a Ryzen 3800 or 3900, is it worth upgrading to 5900 or 5800?
I think the biggest caveat there is how much you can get back for the old chip, assuming you don't need it anymore. I think that's really the determining factor, because if I'm sitting comfy on a, let's say, 3900X, you spent what, $400 or $500 for that CPU, probably not going to sweat another $200 or $300 on top of the difference from the sale of the previous chip. If you're on a lower end CPU, maybe like a 6-core, which is plenty fine for gaming today, say a 3600, making the jump to a 5600, but what X, is it just X now they're calling it? I'm getting confused, all the different SKUs.
Yeah,
but yeah, they're all X. Yeah, they're not XTs, right? That was Zen 2 Plus.
XT is one of those things that'll show up like halfway between cycles like last time, right?
Right, with the exception of how that collides now with the graphics card naming scheme, because we don't know how that's going to play out. But yeah, I think that if you can get a decent chunk of your change back for those older CPUs, then sure, why not? If you can, if you paid 200 or 250 for a 6-core counterpart, and you can get 150 or 200 back, and CPUs don't tend to depreciate too hard, especially if they're only a generation or two old, then sure, I think it's worth at least entertaining. Yeah.
So you're going to sell yours, Chris? Or you're going to sell your 3000 Ryzen system?
Oh, well, this is awkward. I'm on Threadripper right now. So.
This is awkward.
Show off.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
I'm just going to have to probably wait maybe a little bit longer before I can entertain an upgrade.
For the Zen 3 Threadrippers?
Oh, yeah. It's going to happen, I hope.
Yeah. How many cores are you hoping for on that?
Well, since 12 cores didn't really last me this long, for first-gen Threadripper, I might go, 16. That seems reasonable.
That seems mild. I think
I
you can go
mostly just
32, 64.
You would would that work for you, Chris? I mean, it feels like you could do that in a AM4 with a smaller Ryzen. Or,
yeah,
I mean, you got to go for the gold. You got to go for that 32, 64 core part.
Right.
I'm more of a PCIe lane guy. I just need all of the PCI Express lanes.
That's actually a good point, because one of the things that Zen 3 does have over Intel right now is PCIe Gen 4, which is something that Intel won't have for a little while still. So if you're going to run the fastest storage possible, you kind of need to have a Zen 2 or Zen 3. I mean, you need to have a modern Ryzen processor, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, PCIe 4 for storage. You could argue for graphics performance. You know, we'll see, right? We'll see. But it's definitely there for that storage, and anything you're going to be plugging in a PCIe 4. It has been disappointing that it hasn't shown up anywhere else yet. But you know, hey, you got to answer in Ryzen. So
yeah, I think storage was probably the easiest thing to start with showing the benchmarks, right? Because storage is like, now that you're solid state across the board, you know, it's just a fact of getting the new microcontroller from whoever and putting some fast flash on it, and now you have a really fast storage solution. You know, we're seeing 6,000 plus and 7,000 plus speeds on some of these PCIe Gen 4 drives. So I think we'll see some pretty exciting stuff in the next few months on PCIe Gen 4 storage for sure. I'm not sure how it will work for the GPU stuff. We'll talk about that when we get to the GPU section. But for the CPU section, for sure, if I were upgrading today, PCIe Gen 4 is a major thing I would be concerned about, because storage has always been some kind of a bottleneck in my system and everybody's system. So the less bottlenecks, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so quick question for you guys on the SKU assortment. We saw that, you know, the 5950X kind of replaces 3950X. 5900X replaces 3900X. 3800X gets replaced by 5800X, but there is no 5700X. It just goes straight from 5600X to 5800X. Why? Why do you think that they dropped that SKU?
I think that, well, it was intentionally done, right? It's not like they forgot it, or and maybe later on down the line they decide, hey, you know what, we're actually going to throw it out there. Right? Who knows? But as of right now, the way that they tend to release things is by the higher end stuff first, because that stuff's typically a bit harder to sell. So you make that your consumer's only option pool, and then later on you trickle out the lower end stuff. Like graphics cards, it happens with graphics cards all the time. That's why we don't have 60 series cards yet from NVIDIA, or 50 series cards. Like they want people, if they're on the edge, to maybe consider spending a bit more up front. Not that those cards aren't worth those prices, but that just tends to be how they market. With the 5700X, or what would be the 5700X, I think they decided that those CPUs were probably a bit too popular. They probably were stealing a lot of the show from the 800 series counterparts. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to say they're forcing your hand, so to speak, but I feel like they kind of are, because I'm sure they could have released a 65 watt or whatever, and you know, some lower TDP 8-core SKU to kind of fill that gap. So now you've got what, $400 or $500 and then $300. So it's a pretty big gap.
From an end user perspective, it does make more sense to go, you know, 6, 8, 12, 16 cores than 6, 8, 8, 12, 16. You know, having two 8 cores was kind of a questionable, like, why are there two 8-core processors? What's the big difference? They both have multi-threading and so on and so forth. So it was kind of a questionable thing for most users, but I think that it makes sense now, because the lineup is a little bit more logical this way. So even though historically there was always a 3700X or 2700X, I like the idea of kind of dropping it to make it cleaner from the end user perspective, so you can make a really easy buying decision. Speaking of forcing your hand, only the 5700X comes with a heatsink.
We have 5600X, yeah. Yep.
So they tried that with the XTs you guys mentioned before, you know, with the 3800 XT and so on and so forth. Why do you think they dropped the heatsink out of there? Do you think that that's something that was a cost issue, or do you think it's performance issues? What do you think the reasoning is?
I think just a lot of it is, we have to admit, the original Ryzens, while they were fantastic, they had weak points. One way that AMD really made the first gen, second gen parts so awesome is they threw in a fairly decent air cooler. So it's gotten to the point where they're so good they really don't have to throw that cost adder in. No matter what, no matter how cheap they got them, it's always better to save $20 or whatever, or $15. With this generation, these chips are so damn good that just said, let's just not do it. And most of the people that are buying these high performance chips are going to be running coolers from third parties such as Corsair and the like. I think it makes a lot of sense, and they probably didn't always want to have to do it. So I'm actually okay with it. I know people always say, I want to have the box cooler so they can put it on their shelf and then throw it away in 5 or 10 years like everybody does. But I think it makes just perfect sense.
Okay. What do you think, Greg? Have you tested any of the new coolers with the in-box heatsink?
Well, I tested something I probably shouldn't have tested. I threw that stock 5600X. What is a Race Stealth cooler? Put that on a 5950X, and that was no bueno. So I don't recommend doing that. In case that was news to anyone, that is definitely not a cooler that's capable of. Yeah, I think the lowest clocks I saw were 2.7, 2.8 gigahertz. I think that was across all
like
16
Palomino
boards.
Level.
It was
Or
pretty awful. Surprisingly, though, not very loud. So like the way that the board and the software were kind of configured, it wasn't like turbo mode like a reflow or anything. It wasn't like that, but a leaf blower. But it was definitely not a great experience. Now with the 5600X, right, being a 65-watt chip, I believe, perfectly fine for that. And I think that's why AMD decided to still include it in the lower end SKU. Plus, if you're buying a chip that is, I don't want to say on the lower end, it's still a great chip, but compared to the 5950X, it's huge savings, price wise. You're probably a bit more cost sensitive elsewhere. And maybe you just decide to kind of cannibalize another part of your budget with that box cooler. That'll allow you to cat wants out. That'll allow you to, spend that money elsewhere and spend it on a better graphics card or what have you. So it makes sense. I mean, I get it. I just think people are used to getting the coolers in the higher end SKUs. They've kind of come accustomed to it. It's difficult to let go. But if you're spending $500-600 on a CPU, you're probably not going to sweat however much money it's going to cost to buy a decent air cooler to overclock or keep clocks up.
I think you just hit on what I think the real reason is that they kind of have data somewhere that says that anybody who's buying a $500 CPU is throwing that stock cooler in the trash. Like if you're paying $500 for a CPU, another $100 for a high quality all-in-one cooler or high quality air cooler is not a big deal to you, especially if you want to guarantee you're going to hit those boost clocks as often as possible, right? Because they did on Zen 3 update the boost clocks to about 100 megahertz higher across the board. And they even dropped the base clocks down a little bit, I think, to save the TDP stuff and kind of keep the thermal envelope making sense. So it's interesting to see the way they made the changes. But Gordon, you hit on this earlier. Since the Athlon 64 days, I've never seen a launch that dramatically changed the landscape so quickly. I mean, Zen, when the Zen first launched a couple years ago, that was a big deal, and we were excited to see AMD being competitive. Zen Plus kind of refreshed it, made it a little bit better. Zen 2, earlier this year, or last year, I guess at the end of last year, was a really, really good launch, and we were talking to Chris Morley from AMD about that last year, and we were really excited to see how that rolled out. But this launch is even more than I expected AMD to be able to do. I mean, I expected, kind of the standard cadence of 5 to 10% improvements. This is 20%, on some situations. So I think that Team Red deserves kudos for that one for sure. This is a really exciting time, and we'll see how Intel responds to it. Intel's not known to sit on their hands too long, so I know that we have future roadmap stuff from Intel coming out, and also, at some point next year, the year after, DDR5 is just around the corner. So do you think that Intel's going to be able to regain that kind of performance crown before DDR5, or do you think it's going to take DDR5 to hit them?
I think, it feels like you're not going to really see, there's rumors that basically we're going to see, Ice Lake, Tiger Lake, basically using a 14 nanometer process to increase their IPCs. That may get them closer in gaming, maybe even give them the crown possibly. But I don't think they're going to beat AMD on just pure core count. It's pretty hard to beat 16 cores if you're topping out 8 cores, which are what the rumors are. So I think it may get closer to what it might have been like, but I think, it's been really bad for Intel, and it feels like this is going to be a really long, hard winter for them. So I don't think it's going to happen.
So you think it's going to be DDR5 before they actually are competitive again?
Yeah, I guess, because DDR5, and I think that's a really good point, because the whole topic here is upgrading. I think DDR5 will maybe reset everybody because AMD is going to be doing, DDR5. Intel will be doing DDR5, so everybody will move forward again. And I just want to bring that up because I think there's a lot of people that I hear from that are also like, well, I don't want to upgrade till DDR is 5 because
Yeah, but that's at least a year away. I mean, your DDR5 isn't like February. This is like at least a solid year before DDR5 even hits the market. And then, like every memory generation, it takes a while before the price performance value makes sense, right? We have very mature DDR4 today that can hit 4,000 plus megahertz fairly regularly with our performance stuff. And we can do that with Vengeance, we can do that with Dominator. We don't have to sell you some ridiculous $2,000 kit to hit 4,000 megahertz. DDR5 is going to be in its infancy like DDR4 was in its infancy, or DDR3 was in its infancy, or DDR2 was in its infancy, where DDR1 was faster and cheaper than DDR2 for the first 6 to 12 months, and the same way with DDR3 and with DDR4. So even if DDR5 shows up at the end of next year, you might be a solid 6 months to a year away from it making sense from a price performance perspective. So I still think today, if you told me, hey, here's a bunch of cash, go build a new PC, I would build now. I think now's a great time to put it together because you're going to be able to enjoy that performance for a solid year before DDR5 comes out, and another 6 months probably, because DDR5 won't be faster than your system is.
I'm always afraid of pricing because
Yeah.
as we know, new memory is always a shocker. So I think people are like, oh, I'm going to wait for DDR5. Well, are you waiting to 2022 to get to the prices you want? And that's just
Yeah.
a long time to deny yourself, a real kick-ass gaming machine.
Well,
right?
the joke with gaming has always been, or PC gaming has always been that, your system is outdated the minute you buy it, right? You've just purchased everything and there's already something faster that's on the market, on the way to the factory or on the way to the retailer. So we've been talking about it. This is a rare situation. We have just seen AMD launched the new CPUs. Intel launched 10th gen core system earlier this year. We just saw NVIDIA. We just saw AMD Radeon 6800, which will come out tomorrow for performance stuff. I have not seen this many kind of stars align, so to speak, in one time in years and years and years. So I honestly think if you can find the parts today and you have the cash today, you're going to be hard-pressed to beat the system you could build right now for the next 6 months. You're going to be able to build something today that for the next 6 months will be as fast as anything out there. I mean, Greg, do you think that that's offline? I mean,
No, I think you're right. I think that the logic starts to break down when you're willing to wait a year or 2 years or 3 years for new stuff, because there's always going to be something new.
Right.
I mean, that's the nature of tech. It moves so freaking fast. I mean, it's great for tech manufacturers because they're always selling new things. People always want the next thing out there. But if you're willing to wait a year, then you're probably willing to wait another year and then another, and you'll never upgrade.
Yeah.
You'll be stuck on the same system from 2010 that, you're rocking bulldozer pile driver architecture and just saying it's good enough for gaming and 4K gaming, that's all I need.
This is why my Celeron 300A is still in frequently working order, which is a joke that probably only Gordon is old enough to get, actually. But.
You see something, you're like, I think I'll wait another year, and then something else comes out. I think I'm still good. I'll wait another year, and it just keeps adding up. Never ends.
One other argument I think too is the kind of people who are, let's face it, they're very practical. They don't like, they want to drive that computer forever, right?
Yeah.
They're like, so if you're basically on a 7th or 6th gen Intel, let's face it, that's what most people are using because they weren't buying AMD at that point. If you're on a 6th gen or 7th gen KB Lake part, you're going to these new parts, these new Ryzens. It's going to be a serious kick in the pants for performance, especially if you're doing content creation with all the video editing and stuff that are people that you can use all these cores now on these high core parts. So.
All right, so let's talk about CPUs with questions. Chris, has anybody in the chat had any good questions right now?
Yeah, actually. So one of the questions I saw was, what's the best budget CPU to pair with an RTX 3070?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Greg, Gordon, you guys got any ideas?
It's like super de facto answer, but I think the 5600X goes a heck of a long way. And I feel like this is gonna be my answer for a lot of things. Like if you're predominantly gaming, that CPU is 9.5 times out of 10, maybe higher than that, gonna be enough. There's a vast majority of games are not gonna leverage successfully more than 12 threads. It's starting to trend that way. We're starting to see that trend change over time. It used to be 2 cores was enough, and then 4 cores, and then 4 hyper-threaded cores, and now 6 cores, 12 threads. And I think 8 cores will eventually be the sweet spot. And if you want to kind of future-proof yourself, I hate that phrase, but that's just what people use. Then going for the 8-core counterpart, 5800X would be fine. I suppose the Intel equivalent would be like 10700K, which is still a fine chip, or 10900K, even if you can find it that's at a price that's decent. But 5600X is gonna be I'm always gonna look there first, because that's like a great starting point.
Yeah, and it's hard to say. Like you said, 12 threads is a lot still, right? I mean, just 2 generations ago, that was the top end SKU, right? Like that was the best SKU you could get from Intel, was a 6 core 12 thread processor for the mainstream desktop at least. So I think that we've quickly gotten spoiled by 8 and 10 and 12 and 16 cores, but 6 cores, 12 threads is a lot still, especially for the price point. And I would advise, though, throw the Wraith thing in the garbage. No offense to my buddies at AMD, but throw the Wraith cooler in the garbage. You want to hit boost clocks as often as you can. You want to potentially overclock it. Put a good cooler on it. I know a guy who can help you out. So, all right, Chris, what other questions do we have? Anything interesting?
Here's a really interesting one. I'm not sure if you've run into this with your testing, Greg, but when it comes to PCI Express Gen 4, have you run into any issues with riser cables?
Well, I don't benchmark with riser cables, just for the very simple reason that sometimes they don't work, and sometimes you won't even know that they're not working fully, right? I mean, you could be getting some crossed wires essentially, and they're all jumbled up. The more you bend them, the more you kind of ruin the integrity of those things. Some of them are just built horribly, and you might be seeing a 20-30% performance cut. Your screen might not be cutting in and out. You might not be getting no picture. You just might be getting a performance hit, and you won't know it until you start comparing it to other things that don't use the riser cable. So to eliminate that altogether, I just don't test with one generally. But when I do have time to kind of verify the integrity of one, I don't notice with anything pre-Ampere. I guess this doesn't really address the question if you're talking about the new stuff. But a lot of those PCI riser cables are 3.0. I mean, they have like the 3.0 bandwidth capability. So I think there were some case manufacturers, CORSAIR might be one of them, they were addressing this with some of their newer cases. They're going to be redoing the riser cables and including ones that are PCI 4 compatible in the future. I'm not sure. I know there's like length constraints and stuff with the bandwidth, stuff that's above me. But no, I don't test like with those on purpose because of those possibilities. They're kind of sketchy. I have to feel them out.
Can't we just use the slot, folks? I mean,
But look, man, you just spent $800 on your new state-of-the-art.
You want to turn it
GPU.
sideways. You want to show it off.
That's
I
the
get
thing.
it.
Like, let's be fair about this. You build a gaming PC. The most expensive part of that gaming PC is your graphics card. Usually, that's usually the most expensive single component. You bought a 5600X, that's a few $100, but then you go buy a 3080 or you go buy a 6800 XT. That's $700, $800. So why are you gonna just only look at that little like 1.5 inches side profile of it when they have that really nice, sexy 3-fan layout or 2-fan layout, and the whatever that alloy that NVIDIA is using on the 30 series is like unobtainium or whatever on the side of it. If you have a vertical PCI Express mount and you want to look at your video card, then you need that adapter cable. So
to Gordon's point, though, if you're gonna spend $800 on a card like that, why would you risk crippling performance in that card, right?
Well, that's why you need a CORSAIR PCI Express riser cable, because we have specifically scrapped a warehouse of bad ones because we found this problem back in the day. So I'm not going to point fingers at all of our competitors, and it is all of our competitors. But there are a number of bad PCI Express cables out there that will bottleneck or cause compatibility issues, and we have made difficult decisions to scrap inventory because of that. So ours are tested right now, PCI Express 3.0, and the 4.0 is something we are looking at for sure. So you did mention that, Greg. 4.0 is a big deal from a GPU perspective, and so having that adapter cable will be something we'll be probably working on very quickly. I can't talk about unannounced products, obviously, but it would be foolish of us not to look at something similar to that.
And
especially
just to add in, as far as the current PCI Express Gen 3 cable that CORSAIR sells, if you run into issues with it with the RTX 30 series or 6000 series card, Just drop it down to Gen 3 in the BIOS, and you're fine. It's been validated for that, and that should get you where you need to go.
Yeah, and I haven't seen personally yet, and I know it's only Tuesday and Wednesday is a new day for multiple reasons. We can't talk about it because we're all under NDA. But there's nothing I've seen that shows that PCI Express Gen 4 shows a huge performance gap from a GPU perspective over Gen 3.
Yeah, 3 is not limiting. You'd have to go, I think like 2, you'd have to like combine a couple cards that are on the high end to really fully saturate 3. And so.
All right, so let's go to GPUs real quick. Speaking of the devil, GPUs are super exciting right now. The 2080 to 3080 jump was massive from RTX 20 series to 30 series. If you guys remember when GTX 1080 Ti got replaced by RTX 2080, a lot of people were kind of, performance didn't seem worthy of an upgrade, right? It was $1,000 or whatever on your 1080 Ti or $900 on your 1080 Ti, and you got 5 to 10% performance to go to a 2080. Yeah, eventually they had a 2080 Ti, which worked great, but it was $1,200, and there was a lot of discussion of whether it was worthwhile. That jump from 2080 Ti to at $1,200 to 3080 at $700, and getting about the same performance, 2080 Ti to 3080 performance levels, if not a little bit better on 3080.
Yeah, you can get 3070s will keep up with 2080 Ti's. Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems to me that was a huge jump generationally. And I get it, second gen RTX, and they finally got the ray tracing thing worked out. But, I mean, I can't remember, maybe since like 580 to 680, is it the last time we've seen a big generational jump like that from the GPU guys?
Yeah, that was a hefty one, right? Those were really good parts, those 680s.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, is there a reason if you're buying today, and I mean literally today, not tomorrow, but if you're literally buying today, is there anything that would stop you from buying a 3080 if you saw it on the shelf?
No, I think, well, yeah, if you have an AMD tattoo on your left or right bicep, then yeah, you're not going to want it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, this is just, that's why I think this topic is perfect, because for upgraders, you've been sitting on your hands for 24 months. You waited out. You skipped the 20 series. It doesn't get any better. So don't mess with your brain and think you want to wait. I want to wait for the next best thing. And it's just phenomenal, right? What we're going to hopefully see tomorrow when all the benchmarks come out of the new AMD parts. And, of course, these 3,000 parts are phenomenal. And you got Ryzen. It's just like everything is just like perfect alignment. There's always, there's always something that just kind of like, oh, I got to buy this. But this one is like, there's no excuse, I think.
Yeah, I think that the one thing, Greg, you mentioned this yesterday a little bit, was, the wild card is still, how is the 6800 and smart access memory going to work with your Zen 3? So you want to talk a little bit about what that means for GPUs and CPUs working in sync?
Yeah, so, well, in a very condensed sense, you're just supposed to get an additional performance bump by pairing the latest Zen 3 chips with the latest RDNA 2 graphics cards. By nature of how the CPU communicates with the GPU, but it's the RAM, right? Or the VRAM that it accesses. So I think typically it's only like 256 megabytes or something smaller than that. But when you enable smart access, that's what it's called, right?
Smart access memory.
Smart access memory. Yeah, when you enable that, the CPU can access the full load of VRAM there. So it is it's supposed to basically free up any restricted bandwidth, give you an extra 5 to 10% performance bump in games. We'll see if that's the case. I can say that when we can talk about it, I will test it. I'm going to have a dedicated video on it just because I think that it's such an interesting topic. And the way that it was marketed, it just seems like a way for AMD to kind of push people upgrading across the board exclusively into the AMD ecosystem. It kind of reminded me a bit of Apple. I know that's like an insult to some people, but it's smart from a business perspective because you can kind of tackle two different fronts, right? AMD is one of those companies that has the advantage of offering two different products that kind of coexist in the same space. Intel doesn't do that. They don't do it yet. NVIDIA doesn't do that yet, at least on the consumer side. So they're kind of milking that. And I mean, more power to them. If they can make it work, we can get a performance bump. That's an intriguing dilemma there. Do I switch from Intel that I've been with for a decade to AMD because I can get an extra 5 to 10% out of my games by clicking a button? Is it that simple?
Yeah. It's just that easy. You click the button.
On everything.
They did miss an opportunity for Smart Access Memory to just create like a kind of anthropomized character named Sam, and you hit a little button to turn Sam on and stuff like that. And it's a little bit of fun kind of thing. This is why they put me in marketing and not engineering.
That character would pop up in the BIOS. And
I'm gonna start calling it Sam from now on, so I don't forget it. Because I keep forgetting the Smart Access. What I keep forgetting like cache, Smart Access. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff.
But Smart Access Memory is to remind people kind of what it is. It allows your GPU and CPU to share better access to memory, basically. And Gordon, is that specific to AMD, or is that part of the PCIe spec, or?
Well, so originally, when they talked about it, they made it seem like, wow, this is some magic stuff we got here, because we do great CPUs, we do great GPUs, we got this cool magic stuff. And they basically said, NVIDIA, they kind of do this, but it's not as good as ours. So like, wow, this sounds like really phenomenal stuff. And then people started looking into it, like, well, is this just basically, PCI Express, bar, base address register, I think is the acronym, basically how much of a window the CPU can access the GPU through. And, the last few days, NVIDIA being NVIDIA is like, hey, we got that too now. We're doing bar. There's really nothing special about it. We're not going to take something that's just basically part of a PCIe spec and then call it something super special and then market against that.
Wait a minute.
We wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Why would they G-Sync themselves into something like that? I can't think of anything like that. Now, I will give AMD credit. Usually, AMD's the one doing this, right? This is like, generally we've seen NVIDIA comes out with some great new technology like DLSS or RTX or whatever, and they proprietarize it. If that's a word I just made up, but they make it a proprietary. They get a marketing term, they trademark it, and then it becomes the standard. Like they bought 3DFX for SLI as the marketing capability, right? So it's like SLI became an NVIDIA only thing, and we had SLI certified memory and things like that, right? Because it became their kind of synonymous thing for gaming for years. AMD kind of was always in the, well, we can do that too, or we can do this and we can do that. This time they hit first. They for the first time in a long time, AMD came out guns blazing and are like, we've got Smart Access Memory, we're ready to go. And like last week we saw NVIDIA's like, oh, that's, we can do that. That's cool. So, again, kudos to Team Red for going on the offensive on this one. It's not very common traditionally for them, so it's nice to see that tone change. Just from a competitive analysis standpoint. I know all my NVIDIA buddies watching this are sending me nasty emails right now, like, dude, I thought we were cool, but I think even secretly they're probably like, wow, we didn't expect AMD to hit us so hard on that, So
it's real, and it's clever too, because if you think about it, let's think about RTX.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks I have had arguments about this for the last 2 years. Well, people think, well, RTX. They think ray tracing in the DirectX API is RTX, simply because NVIDIA was the first to support it in hardware. And it's still, for a lot of people, they're like, well, I want RTX. I don't want this.
It's not ray tracing. See, that's NVIDIA did that well. NVIDIA says it's not ray tracing, it's RTX. RTX equals ray tracing equals RTX. They rebranded their entire line from GTX, which they'd had for almost 20 years, like 18 years or something, to RTX, like just because they wanted people to know about ray tracing is a big deal. So that's actually a really good question for you. I know that you guys are under NDA and we can't talk specifics about 6800 performance until tomorrow, but what about AMD's Radeon 6000 series and ray tracing? What's going on there? Do they have that capability?
Greg, I think he's got handcuffs on. I don't really, because I intentionally have compartmentalized myself. They do have hardware ray tracing. How it's implemented, that's been presented to the public, which is where I'm standing in that side of the circle. It is in hardware. I don't know where the performance is going to go, but I think most people expect NVIDIA to have the edge in actual, DXR titles. Mm-hmm. So if you're that excited about ray tracing, then yeah, I think we'll have to wait till tomorrow, but I'm going to guess that NVIDIA will still have the lead there.
Okay. What do you think, Greg? I know you can't talk about the actual performance, but what do you know about what they've publicly disclosed about hardware ray tracing?
To be frank, it is hard for me to, like Gordon said, compartmentalize between what I saw in the reviewer's guide and what I saw in the presentation. So I'm going to play it safe here.
And just say, wait till tomorrow and check out my YouTube channel.
Yeah, and this is another one of those things where like it's very difficult to test like 1-to-1 because the way that AMD does it, and again, I don't know how much of this is like under NDA still, but the way that they do it is different, and there is hardware based acceleration there, but a lot of it is kind of software, magic as well. It's a different way that it's done, and that ultimately is why I'm not sure how much of it I can say.
So let's share some performance slides that came directly from AMD so that we can talk about something. So that is not going to get you guys fired or in trouble. Alan, can you bring up the first slide that we have for the Radeon 6800, please? Where we talk about the AMD marketing slide where they showed the 2080 Ti performance at 1440p next to the RX 6800 non-XT. Yeah, this one. So this I thought was really interesting when they showed this on the 28th at their PR event. I thought this was really cool because most people are not gaming at 4K, first off. Primarily because it's really hard to game at 4K, and also because if you have like a 24, 27-inch monitor, 4K is kind of diminishing returns, right? But against the 2080 Ti, which is a $1,200 graphics card 3 months ago, they're saying that their 6800, which is their $500 card, is basically dominating in all these SKUs and all these game titles. And then those are not like easy to perform game titles, not all of them, right? I mean, we have Borderlands is in there, Division 2, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare stuff, Gears of War 5. I mean, these are titles that are somewhat stressful. Forza Horizon is surprisingly higher frame rate than you'd expect, but a lot of these titles are difficult to hit this kind of performance at 1440p with options turned on and stuff.
Yeah, they're ultra, pretty much across the board. Yeah,
right.
Ultra, and highest, yeah.
I mean, I know that everyone is kind of looking at this, and some people might be looking at this and saying, do you really need 200 frames per second? But the answer is yes, because that's what the games do today. What they'll do in 6 months, like what is Cyberpunk going to do? What is, the next version of Assassin's Creed or next year's Call of Duty or next year's Modern Warfare, going to do? Assuming there are titles next year, which there usually are, so I can't break NDA on that. But there's going to be a Far Cry 6. What's that going to perform like? If you have good performance today, you'll have better performance tomorrow, right? That's generally the way this has worked. So maybe you get 90 frames a second in Far Cry 5, but you'll get 80 frames a second in Far Cry 6 or something. So you need to make sure you have as good a performance as you can today. The 6800 looks like a winner in that chart, right? I mean, that's public from AMD, so you guys can talk about that chart specifically. I mean, if that's the type of performance people are going to see tomorrow, then is it something that you think that a lot of people will be upgrading to as well instead of the 3070 and 3080?
Definitely, I think. Well, because let's be frank here, it's what you can get with. Good luck finding the unicorn of a 3000 part right now.
Yeah,
I think. People are so hard up if you just sold your last graphics card and now you're waiting for a next generation card.
Yep.
You know what? If you can get a Radeon because you can't get an NVIDIA card and you don't know when it's going to happen, and it's as good as all the reviews say it is tomorrow, then hell, why not, right?
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think the other side is, like you said, availability is going to be critical. Like whatever you can find right now. We've seen demand is, outpacing supply on everything. It's not just GPUs and CPUs, it's our stuff and Microsoft's Xboxes and Sony's PlayStation 5s. I know that Alan has a PlayStation 5, but he pre-ordered his like 6 years ago or something. I think he ordered PlayStation 6 already. I think that, if we're going to kind of talk a little bit about availability, we'll talk about that in the next section here, but I think that right now, from a CPU and GPU perspective, that was just the standard 6800. There's an XT, which is the higher performance version. And then there's also the 6900 XT, which, Alan, if you bring that up real quick, the 6900 XT has, what they're saying is 3090 level performance. And for a fraction of that price, right? It's instead of $1,500, it's $1,000. And this is at 4K. So they showed this off and they said, hey, this is our metric, this is our benchmarks. And that, again, versus the 3090, which is a $1,500 GPU, that, by the way, is the size of a small child. So, like, It's a big hot GPU, and the 1600 XT supposedly beats it, which is, again, in AMD coming out guns blazing, saying not only are we going to beat your performance or match it, but we're going to be $500 less. So, I mean, does this seem like something? I know we can't even talk about 1600 XT for a long time, but if this benchmark is correct, I would expect this to sell very well.
Yeah, and if you look at NVIDIA and AMD's lineup, that's really the weak point in NVIDIA's lineup, right? Because the other parts are Radeons are maybe $50 less of their counterparts. Mm. If they're really saying we're going after the top end $1,500 NVIDIA card, but we're only going to sell it for $1,000, and you're already sort of in that $800 graphics card range, it's like, well, what's $200 more, to be honest? Because if you're buying an expensive graphics card, $1,000 is way closer than $1,500, and I think that card, again, wait for reviews tomorrow, but that's going to be a great card, and I think it's really going to hurt NVIDIA in a lot of ways that I don't think they expected with that top end card.
You don't think they expected it?
I mean, that's the one thing. Sometimes, and this is the joke among reviewers, it feels sometimes like NVIDIA knows what's coming from AMD before AMD knows what's coming from AMD, right? That's no joke, right? Because it's like, how in the hell is NVIDIA like? They're always like, Greg, he'll back me up on this. You'll take a call from AMD about something, but 2 days beforehand, you'll get a call for NVIDIA, and they'll have some product to counter what you haven't been briefed on by AMD. Yep. It's maddening for AMD, I'm sure, because NVIDIA is just really is why they're number one, right? But I don't think they really expected that they would price this part at $1,000, because that's really sort of the weak lineup in NVIDIa's lineup. Cards are awesome.
I don't know anything about what went on at NVIDIA. I don't know how they made the decision to do what they did. But I will say this. I would disagree with that in principle because of one thing. The TI fighter, the 2080 Ti was $1,200. The 3090 is $1,500. They raised the price of the 2080 Ti SKU $300, right? Then they kept the 2080 Super SKU price for the 3080. That's the same $700. So instead of the $700 to $1,200 price gap that they had from 2080 Super to 2080 Ti, they now have a $700 or $800 price gap from $700 to $1,500. So they basically widened that open between 3090 and 3080. Maybe they did that to give themselves some flexibility to fight whatever AMD was going to launch in that price gap. Maybe they kind of had that, and I don't know anything for a fact, so don't take this as legend, but it looks like that was something that they thought may have been a possibility. NVIDIA is very tactical. They're very, very smart guys, so they would do something like that to give themselves some room to fight it, maybe.
Yeah, but I guess, again, we're kind of stuck because Greg can't talk about what he knows.
Yeah.
But what we know publicly is I would think this card presents better, right?
Yeah.
Because it's basically better than a 3080 and competes more with a 3090, but it's $500 less. So I just kind of think that for a lot of people, they love AMD for the value. The value for that card looks way better because they compared themselves to the $1,500 card. They're not comparing themselves to a card that's only $100 more. So I think that, to me, again, I'm in the blind here, but it feels like that will be where they get a lot of their success.
I think an important point, though, if it's possible, if we can pull that slide back up, the 3090 slide, the one thing that I noticed a lot of people watching it or just giving like initial feedback kind of glossed over was that AMD had done a couple things to kind of pump that card up. So it's essentially factory overclocked with the rage mode enabled, and then of course SAM enabled as well. That is something that I think they kind of saw that they had to do. And if AMD is saying that rage mode and SAM will give you, I think this was in the charts that they publicized, a pretty sizable performance bump, somewhere in the realm of anywhere between 5 and maybe 15%. Well, there you go. I mean, that's why the 6900 XT looks so competitive. I think AMD priced it at what they did because they realized people were going to plug these cards in, not bother enabling or changing things like I imagine most people do. Most people are not going to sit through and tweak small things to extract the most. It's just how it is. Most people don't care. And then they'll realize that, hold on, compared to what my friends are getting with their 3090s, I'm not seeing the same, frame rate at the same settings. And, it's only going to be, I imagine, 5, 10, maybe 15 FPS here or there, depending on the frame rate in the game. But it takes a special configuration to compete. So I think the price point of $1,000, it's not necessarily that they wanted to undercut NVIDIA. I mean, I feel like they that was it to an extent, but they also knew that on a level playing field, if we're being honest here, assuming they didn't overclock the 3090, which they didn't say they would, and I'm not sure why they would ever feel inclined to, they knew that they weren't really there. They were close, but sometimes 5 FPS, I mean, to some people that justifies a $500 bump, Like,
well, if you're going to buy
the 3090,
right, if you're going to buy the best, then the price flexibility is there. So
exactly,
okay.
yeah.
So let's move to some last questions because Gordon's going to leave here pretty soon. So Chris, what questions do we have from the chat that we can have Gordon help out with before he moves on to go down to the away team with the and everybody else?
Yeah, let's see here.
I saw somebody ask 3600 performance memory, 3600 megahertz memory versus 4000 on Ryzen 5000 series.
Is it worth it?
Yeah.
Paying that extra? Well, from Corsair's aspect, yes.
Yeah, Gordon's right. Go ahead and buy as much fast memory as you can, preferably 128 gigs as much. Honestly, I will say this. I personally have not tested that 4000 versus 3600 megahertz stuff yet, but I have seen a number of tests online that show that 4000 megahertz has better performance in Zen 3 than it did on Zen 2. So being able to, we had that kind of 1-to-1 magic infinity fabric ratio thing with Zen 2, where everything kind of, at 3600 you had a kind of, diminishing returns point where you wouldn't get much better. I've seen that that's changed, and it looks like 4000 is a little bit faster now. We're doing some testing right now still on our side, and we'll have some data up when we get it finished. But I think that from what I've seen from reviewers, it definitely looks like 4000 has more performance on Zen 3 than it did on Zen 2. So I would say, go ahead and look at some good third-party reviews out there that you can find through a number of good tech YouTubers and other review channels. But from right now, what I can see, it looks like it might have some performance benefits.
Yeah, and I think to have an actual answer, I would recommend that if you're sort of like practical, you just want it to work, you're not really all worried about, messing around with stuff, 3600 is really sort of the sweet spot. But if you are chasing that, 1 or 2% kind of person, then yeah, you definitely will want 4000 because you're the kind of person that you want. If you're angry because you've lost 1.5%, so yes, for that person, yes. For most people, probably not.
All right. Okay. Chris, what else do we have? Any other cool questions?
Let's see. Someone asked what the best graphics card for Ryzen 5 3600, budget $800 to $900.
I mean, the part of that equation really should also have what panel you're using. If you're talking about 1080p, 60 hertz panel, whatever. You don't need a $900 or $800 graphics card. If you're talking about a 360 hertz 1080p or 4K or 14, then really you have to know the other side of that equation. So
let's just say 1440p for argument's sake. What would you recommend for that guy?
I would say definitely, it's hard to beat 3080, right? 3080 is pretty awesome. Again, we got to wait to see what we get tomorrow, if there's any price movement, but 3080, 3070 I think is a good place to be.
Okay. Any other things, Chris?
I think that's really it for now.
Okay. So we're going to move over and transition on to some Corsair specific stuff. So I wanted to thank Gordon for sitting in on the chat with us today, Gordon. Go back to whatever away team visit you were going to be on a second ago.
We're about to beam down. I do want to give myself a shout out. Tomorrow at noon, we will be doing a noon PST Pacific time. We will be doing a live stream talking about new products that are coming out tomorrow as far as benchmarks. So pop on by there. But this has been fun. I got to get down to the planet surface, though. Captain Kirk has got yet another one of those STDs I got to take care of.
Oh, Jesus. All right.
When you're in medical branches.
All right, let's beam him out of here, guys.
And transmission. All right. Thanks, Gordon. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the Corsair specific stuff. Let's move on into the next steps of what we're talking about, which is we've talked about GPUs. We've talked about CPUs. obviously, we don't sell the processor. You're going to get something from AMD or Intel. You're going to get a motherboard from one of the big guys, Gigabyte, MSI, Asus, ASRock, whoever. And then you're going to need power supply. You're going to need a cooler. You're going to need memory. You're going to need storage. All that stuff has to be as good as possible, right? Because otherwise, we see thermal throttling issues on all the high-end CPUs these days if you don't have enough cooling. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our cooling lineup so people understand kind of, first and foremost, is everything going to work with AM4 and Intel 10th generation? Chris, since you work here, do you mind giving a quick overview of what's compatible with what?
Well, in terms of all-in-one coolers, pretty much all of our current products fit with whatever system you're building. So if it's the AM4 socket, LGA 1200 socket, even like a Threadripper, like it includes everything you need in the box to get going.
Okay. So, Greg, have you played around with a lot of our air coolers or water coolers, rather?
Yeah, more so the AIOs. Is this directed toward like socket compatibility and stuff like?
Yeah, what you're thinking about someone who's buying a system today. Not everyone spends their life living and breathing this stuff like we have to, right? So somebody maybe just like, hey, I haven't built a system since my 7700K or something a few years ago. Does my cooler still work, or should I get a new cooler? There's those questions. So if you're buying Intel right now, spoiler alert, every socket for mainstream, whether it be 1151, 1152, 1150, 1200, all of those mechanically are the same for the bracket. So everyone should know that first and foremost. So if you bought an H100i, V2 or something like that, it will mechanically fit on a new 10th gen Intel Core. And AMD has had socket AM4 for years now, and it's the same physical socket. So it will work mechanically with all of those things. However, we have stuff like Elite Capellix, the new CPU coolers that we have, that have better performance, more features than the last gen stuff. So have you played around with the Elite Capellix coolers at all, Greg?
Yes. So I actually, in the video where I stuck that Wraith Stealth cooler onto the 5950X, which if you guys are new to the stream, that was god awful. Do not do that. I also used the Capellix kind of like an ideal. This was the 360 mil, the H150i Elite Capellix, and it was, well, as you can imagine, noticeably better. And when you mentioned thermal throttling, right? So what a lot of people think of when they think of like traditional thermal throttling is like the CPU hits 95 degrees, whatever, 100 degrees, whatever T junction is for that CPU, and then pulls back on its frequency when that thermal load proves too great for whatever cooler you've stuck to it. Well, what I've noticed a lot of especially Zen 3 in my experience, what I've noticed happens is that there's no like real hard thermal throttling, like at 95 degrees, the CPU will gradually pull its frequency back to kind of stay under a temperature threshold. And it's smart. But at the same time, if you know that your cooler is directly affecting CPU performance, you want as good as you can in theory get without kind of pointlessly adding like more rad space or what have you. You don't need like a 6-tower air cooler to cool a 5800X, unless you don't use thermal paste or something crazy. Like you're going to be fine with a single tower, even a single tower, but a dual tower cooler usually is enough as well. But the H150i was great for the 5950X. I think that up to 360 mil especially can pretty much handle any CPU out there right now, barring some crazy overclock or some insane vCore. Or if you have like just a horribly bent chip, which I've been a victim of at least a few times, you kind of can't get around that. But yeah.
Sometimes you get a bad bin. Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
I was watching your video the other day you did about that, and I saw you had a really nice graph at the end of it where you showed kind of gaming performance with the Wraith cooler versus the H150i Elite Capellix. And what I noticed is, and I'm trying to remember, but it was like 20, 30 frames a second.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean,
it was like 30%. Yeah, 30% dip using that stock cooler.
I mean, it wasn't like, oh well, you might get 5 or 6 frames here or there at 140 versus 137 or something like that. But it was It was like you're talking 100 frames a second minimum or whatever to like 70 or 80 minimum. So I mean, it seems like not a big deal, but when you're talking about a 20 to 30 frame per second difference, it's at that level, it's significant, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and if you're at home and if you're familiar with your BIOS and comfortable kind of tweaking things just temporarily, you can go into your BIOS, assuming you have an overclockable SKU. You might even, I'm not sure if you can do it with non-K Intel SKUs. I know you can do it with pretty much any Ryzen CPU out there. You can manually like underclock or downclock, however you want to word it, your CPU. I think in my case with the Wraith Stealth Cooler, the 5950X was hovering around 2.8 gigahertz. I mean, you can have your CPU, you can kind of force it to run at that frequency. Pop open a game, check your frame rate, and then go back and revert to stock again or whatever your manual overclock was. And if that game is especially CPU intensive, you will see a huge performance jump, which is why, I mean, there's a huge core count push from AMD, which is great, but there's also the need for strong individual cores, high frequencies, and you lose out on one of those big time when you limit it thermally.
Yeah.
So that's always something to keep in mind. Is like past a certain point, yeah, you'll be fine. There's no need to really put something bigger on there. But if you start shrinking that cooler, the cooler capacity, it definitely hurts your returns.
So, Greg, would you say with an all-in-one cooler, would the orientation of that cooler matter at all? I believe you also did a video on this.
Yeah, I just did a video on it. Yeah, and it was kind of in response to what Steve at Gamers Nexus and the guys over there had put together. I feel like it just needed some clarification because the issues with the orientation thing, like I understand, you having a pump way up here and your radiator's down here and the pump's the highest point in the loop, like that's a problem long term. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that. But what a lot of manufacturers, and CORSAIR's done this, other manufacturers have done this as well. They show the cooler or the radiator specifically up front with the barbs up top, because generally that's how long the tubes are not long enough to run, barb down up to the CPU around the graphics card, especially if it's a big graphics card, or it'll just look silly. But as long as all-in-one cooler itself is filled properly, you should not habitually have air circulate downward.
Yeah.
So if you can mount it up top, I think that's the best way to do it. I think that looks the best, frankly, in a lot of cases as well. But I tend to just mount it up front if that's the only place to do it. It's not like I'm gonna be like, well, I'm not going to buy an AIO then if I can't mount it up front, or I'm going to shrink my radiator size to 240 or 280. Like if I want a 360 and the only place to put it is up front with barbs up, I'm going to do it. And I've done that for years. And I said it in the video, I'll say it here. I have not had a problem with any pump I've ever. And this is the thing, like if reviewer samples were like cherry picked, like of course there was like, I'm going to send Greg and Bitwit and whoever else, GN, I'm going to send them the AIOs with like the best pumps. I don't know how you would even do that, but like let's just assume you're like cherry picking like, AIOs. If they weren't filled properly and that orientation was bad, it doesn't matter how cherry picked they are, they're going to die. And that just hasn't been the case with any AIO I've gotten. If the pump is dead, it's dead on arrival. Yeah. And then that's a design flaw. That's just a manufacturer defect,
Yeah, so you're right, Greg. The thing is about, how much coolant is in the loop, first off, because that's the critical element for the bubbling and the noise and stuff like that. But really, Steve's review is correct in one assertion, which is that you should not have the pump be the highest point in your loop.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the big nightmare scenario, is that everything is below the pump. That's the worst. So like if you were going to put your pump and then you put your radiator on the bottom of the case, like if you had a case where like the 680X or something like that, where you can mount a radiator to the bottom, if you put that down there by itself for the CPU and you don't reorient anything and the pump is the highest point, then you can get cavitation, you can cause some noise issues, you can cause some even small performance issues. But as long as one of the two end tanks, whether it's the tubing side or the other side of the radiator, is above that pump, the air bubbles will end up there. So from a reliability and performance perspective, it's not a big deal whether the tubes are on bottom or on top. You might see a slight noise difference, but I personally haven't seen it myself. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's possible that someone could flip over the radiator and hear that difference. I just haven't seen it. And I don't doubt that Steve has seen it if Steve has been testing it and paying close attention to like the nitpicky stuff that he's good with. I mean, obviously, Steve is a fantastic reviewer and does a lot of in-depth dives on stuff that other people don't either have time or inclination to do, so we'll give him full credit for that, and Gamers Nexus is awesome for that. His hair, we'll discuss later. But it's, I guess everyone has a trademark, right? So let's talk real quick about the other side of the performance aspect when it comes to all-in-one cooling, though, which is, you wanted to cut down the thermal throttling, which is a big deal. But it's also, the other side is the airflow optimization inside your case, right? So if you put the radiator in front, the cold air from outside the case hits your CPU cooler first and foremost, right? And then you pump some hot air into the case, so you raise the ambient. If you put your CPU cooler on top, you're not pumping the hot air into the case, you're pumping the hot air out of the case, but you're pumping hot air into the rad because the ambient temp inside the case is hotter than outside the case, right? So maybe your kind of outside the case is 25 degrees C and inside the case it might be 40 degrees C. So you're gonna have slightly worse CPU cooling if you put the rad up top than if you put it at front, at the adverse effect of slightly hotter internal temperatures if you put the rad in front. And that may be if you have a really, really borderline GPU or something like that, that could be something where, hey, maybe my GPU will throttle more if I put the rad in front for the CPU cooler. So from a thermal optimization standpoint, know how good a heat sink your GPU has can help you decide whether you should put the radiator on top or radiator in front of the case.
And a lot of cards now have, I would say, especially with, I obviously can't comment on the AMD stuff yet, but I know that the NVIDIA stuff that we've tested, I mean, even the Founders Edition, which it's not a reference board, but even the Founders Edition card that you could buy directly from NVIDIA, and I think you can only buy it, at least as of a few weeks ago, from Best Buy, which is kind of weird. That card still runs, if I recall from my graphs, mid-70s. There's plenty of thermal headroom there. 70s is cool, relatively speaking. I usually have more difficulty thermally with my CPUs than my GPUs. So if that's the worry from a lot of people, unless again you're going crazy with the GPU or memory overclock, front mounting is perfectly fine. And even if you top mounted, like if your CPU is hitting 90 degrees Celsius, front mounted, and maybe you're hitting, I mean, it's going to be very small if you mount it up top, the difference wise, it may be 91, 92. The fact is you're getting rid of the air just as quickly, right? That air is leaving the radiators just as fast. It's not really about, and it does obviously matter what temperature the air is coming into the radiator. But at the end of the day, it's about how much air you displace from the radiator. So that's why it doesn't have as big an impact as some people might think that it does. But and that's another reason why front mounting, there's really no issue there usually, because the graphics cards usually, especially now, run quite a bit cooler.
So let's talk about memory then. That's the other side of the CPU upgrade path. Memory is a big deal. We sell memory. If you guys didn't know, Corsair sells memory. It's one of our. I know it's
kind
weird.
Of one of our things.
It's something. It's kind of weird for a keyboard company to sell memory. We know, but I think realistically. Everybody kind of overlooks it as like a check mark thing, like, oh, you have to get memory for your system anyway, whatever, that's fine. But I wanted to talk a little bit about our lineup because I think it's really critical people understand that, like, when you're running memory for something that's as delicate as an overclocked system, where you really have to eliminate your potential failure points, something that is pre-tested to hit those speeds is really critical. And if you're not overclocking, you're just going to run 3200 megahertz all day, buy a 3200 kit, and hit XMP enabled or whatever, and you're done. You're good.
It's usually what I do.
Right.
Don't forget to actually hit XMP.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, don't forget.
No, what'll happen is they'll forget to hit XMP, and then they'll go complain on our Amazon reviews. This only does 2733 or whatever.
I could not imagine how frustrating that's gotta be.
Yeah. It's been the case since I've worked here, but I've only been here 16 years, so it's not that I've not been here that long. But realistically, the XMP thing is great. But if you wanted to go to 38 or 4,000 megahertz, you need something that is tested there. And both of our Vengeance modules and Dominator Platinum line, the Vengeance RGB stuff, those are all tested to go up to that level. And they are really capable, especially if you're doing the Infinity Fabric, which our lab tester, my buddy Dustin, just said, actually on Zen 3, Infinity Fabric can go 4,000 at 1 to 1 to 1. So it doesn't stop at the 3600 point. You can keep that 1 to 1 to 1 up to 4,000, which is really, really nice. It is overclocking your Infinity Fabric, which sounds like something your doctor would get in trouble for, but it's something that I would recommend that if you're going to look at getting every ounce of performance out of your brand new Zen, getting some memory that can match that need is really critical.
And spending, if you're going to spend $500, $600, $700 on a 5900X or 50 950X. I don't think that there's, I mean, maybe if you're just stretching your budget for like specifically for that CPU, you just really want that CPU for whatever you do. If you have room in your budget, I think that memory allocation especially should be prioritized there, because again, it's going to kind of amplify itself per core as well. So in the 12 core, 16 core chips, you're going to benefit that much more from having the faster kit of RAM.
Yeah. Have there been any memory questions, Chris? You seen anything in the chat?
Well, this is one that we see quite a bit. 3200 versus 3600 as far as memory kits go.
So it's the frequency is one side of it, right? But you've also got your cache latency, your timings.
Exactly.
So a really common 3200 megahertz kit that I see is like it'll be 3200, and then you'll have like CL16, 16, 18, 18, something like that. You can find those kits dirt cheap. I think even Corsair has like some of their Vengeance LPX kits, I think are like 50, 60 bucks. Like DDR4 is really cheap, even for the faster kits. But if you want like really fast, if you want, 3600, 3800, I forget how the memory frequency stack, 4000 even, unless it's a really, really well binned kit of memory, or the individual modules are binned very well, you'll see that trade-off: higher frequency, higher cache latency. So the key is to find a high frequency kit with relatively low CL. And if you find that, if you're going to pay a premium for it, like those modules, they come around once in a blue moon. That's if they were super prevalent, anyone could have them, they wouldn't be fairly expensive, relatively speaking. But if it's a trade-off between like 3200 megahertz CL16 and 3600 megahertz CL18, which is another really common combination, I would just look at price at that point. Usually you can hit something a bit higher than 3200 with those $50, $60 kits in that range. So, you kind of got to play with it a bit. But if you're paying about the same, chances are they're going to perform about the same on paper.
Yeah.
And kind of as a follow-up to that, 2-up or 4-up? Like, how many modules is too many?
Are they single rank or dual rank?
That's and that is something that changed with Zen 3 as well, I believe. Now, this is something I have not tested. I'm sure you guys know more about this than I do, but I have heard through the grapevine that 4 sticks, the dual rank, if I'm calling correctly, very beneficial for Zen 3, which is something we didn't see with Zen 2. Zen 2, Zen Plus, those CPUs, if I recall, benefited from just 2 sticks. I get single and dual rank and 2 versus 4 confused. But yeah, so I just know that 2 sticks was great for up to Zen 2, and now apparently 4 sticks is better for Zen 3. Is that what you guys have found in the lab?
Well, we haven't completed all of our testing yet. We're kind of in the middle of it. But what we've seen is that the way that memory addresses the multiple ranks has become slightly more efficient now. So for those of you guys who don't know, I'm not going to get into the weeds on the engineering aspect of it, but a lot of people will look at like the metaphor is on a single stick of memory, you can fit 16 different chips on it, for example, right? If you put 8 chips instead of the 16 on the slot, whether they be 8 on one side or kind of 4 and 4, depending on how it's laid out in the PCB of the actual memory, it can be a single rank module, or if you put you fully populate it, it's a double rank module, for argument's sake, right? So then that module then has a slightly wider bus to address the controller. So if you do that, let's say you have 2 by 8 for a 16 gig kit, right? And those 16 gig kits, there's 8 gig modules in them, and they're both single rank on each side. Now you have 2 ranks of memory that your memory controller can address. On the other hand, if you had the same speed ICs, but they were the lower density, so you had 2-sided modules and you had 16 ICs per memory module, then you would have quad ranks, 4 ranks to address instead of 2 ranks to address in those same 2 sticks. We have now seen that performance, where it didn't used to matter that much if you had 8 or 16 ICs on there, it was more, you see way more difference from like cache latency or something. We're starting to see that make a little bit of a difference. I can't really get into the weeds on exactly what the performance data we've seen is yet, because we haven't completed our testing yet, so I don't have a final solution. But I can say enough that I've seen like TechSpot did a really good thing about it the other day. If you guys check out techspot.com, I know that Stephen Burke even mentioned that he had a 4-up kit where he took 2 of them out and performance went down significantly, which is it's not a perfect A/B test, but it is indicative of something that could be going on. So this is starting to show up. So I think you'll see over the next few weeks that the rank count is also it's not just number of modules, but it's the amount of ranks of memory you're talking about addressing at the same time, which makes sense because you increase the bus for the memory controller to transfer data back and forth. So I think that's something we'll see a lot more data on for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited to test that.
All right, power supplies. GPUs all require new power supplies because they're massive, right? So even the stated TDP from NVIDIA is 350 watts on the 3090 and 320 watts or something on the 3080. And I know that the 6800 and 6900 are also 300 plus watt cards. What kind of power requirements are you gonna recommend someone just go buy a 450 and call it a day? Or what are you thinking, Greg?
Probably, yeah. 450 probably won't get you there, especially if you're buying the higher end stuff. 450 used to go a long way, and it still does. But with the lower end hardware, and like we said earlier, what AMD and NVIDIA and even Intel usually do is release the more expensive stuff first, right? So that more people may be tempted to buy the more expensive stuff. And the more expensive stuff is going to be a bit more power hungry. And I think in our testing, the 3080, I can't remember which one it was. One of the AIBs was pulling around 320 watts or so, and that's just from the card. And then you've got the CPU, you've got small miscellaneous stuff here and there on the motherboard, the RAM, all that's pulling power. I think that in the 750 watt range, that's I think the new sweet spot. I would have said maybe a couple years ago 650 watts was a sweet spot, unless you were going crazy. But for a solid mid-range system now, mid to high range, I think that 750 gives you a lot of breathing room. Again, you want to be in that the peak efficiency curve, which is usually around 50% load. And if your system's pulling under heavy load around 400 watts, maybe a bit more than that, 750 is pretty much where I'd feel comfortable. Anything lower than 700, and you start stressing the power supply more than you probably should.
Yeah, I know that AMD and NVIDIA both said like a 650 watt requirement for some of the like 3070 stuff, but Chris, you and I have kind of felt like when we build systems, obviously we're spoiled because we don't pay for them out of pocket, right? But 750, 850 gives you kind of the headroom and you can run the fan a little bit quieter. I mean, what would you put in your personal system if you were buying a 3080, Chris?
Well, actually, I just recently spec'd out a system for somebody. So it's a 5600X with either a 3070 or 3080 based off of budget. And for that, I actually picked an RM850. That seemed like to be the best balance as far as features and total wattage.
Yeah, I like the RM family a lot. Really, really quiet, gold certified, fully modular. It's kind of checks all the boxes for basic power supply. And RMX is a little bit higher quality, has a better components internally, a little bit better fan. And then obviously HX and AX are flagship level SKUs that are really top end. And if you can get an AX 1600i if you want, I mean, go ahead. It's overkill for most people, but hey, overkill is underrated.
Something people tend to overlook too. They think that I can just get a 1600 watt power supply and run it at under load 400 watts, no problem, which you could do. But actually, if you look at the efficiency graphs, the power supply efficiency drops if you're the further away from 50% load you get on either side. So if you start using maybe let's say you have a 1,000 watt power supply and your system's pulling 800, that's a lot less efficient than if you were pulling 500. But if you were only pulling 200 or 250, that power supply is still less efficient than it would be at around a 50% load. So I like to like what Chris said. If you're going for a system that NVIDIA recommends, let's say 750 watt, I would go a bit higher than that, just because that's your new starting point, and you want a bit more breathing room just in case you swap or upgrade or what have you. Mm-hmm. So going a bit higher, I think, is a safe bet, especially if it's within your budget constraints. But going way overboard, as tempting as that might be, even though really no one's going to see the power supply that you're rocking unless you have one of those cases that lets you see it right there, it's probably a bit more detrimental to your power supply than you think.
Yeah, in most situations, you'd be right about that if you're comparing apples to apples. So like gold certified power supply, for example, if you got an RM1000X versus an RM750X, and you have the same kind of architecture plan, they're both gold certified, both that. If you're using 200 watts of power, you're probably better off with an RM750X on that situation, because even though you have the headroom there, you might be slightly less efficient. But when you're talking about AX1600i specifically, and this is where I'll correct you, that's titanium certified, which is 2 tiers above that. And also, because the AX1600i is, how do I put this mildly, the best power supply ever created by the hands of man, I think that you can say that, even at low loads, this is over 90% efficient even at 10% load. So you can run 160 watts on an AX600i and you're still over 90% efficient. So it's
that's why titanium is the titanium rating is so special. That's why it's so hard to hit. And you're right, because you have to keep that efficiency way down low on the power draw side, and that's no easy feat.
Right, and it's also like, to put it in another way to think about it, that 90% efficiency at 10% load. So I can theoretically run at gold certified peak.
Yeah, that's gold. Yep.
The worst efficiency of my titanium product is the best a gold will ever do. So that's just to put it mildly. So gold power supplies are fantastic. 80 plus gold rated power supplies are great. 80 plus platinum are even better, right? A couple percent better. Titanium is like its own world. Like if you were in the titanium level certification, there's like it's like being in the Hall of Fame as a major athlete or something like that. You don't get to the Hall of Fame by being the Hall of really good. It's not like the Hall of guys who are pretty good team players and good rebounders.
Yeah, they're decent.
Yeah. So I make sports analogies. It's fun. So that's power supply stuff. New cables for power supplies. What do you think about the 12-pin on the Ampere, the 30 series?
If I'm being blunt, I hate it. It's annoying. It's really annoying.
See, and I'm a little spoiled in this because despite the questionable time of implementation and how it was done and everything, I love the idea of replacing these big old 8-pin cables that you need 2 or 3 of with a single small form factor 12-pin connector. Maybe I've had to cable route too many systems or something, and I hate having to wrap up those individually sleeved 12 cables each thing. So I think it's a good solution that we will have to move to at some point. I like the connector a lot. I don't really like where it is on the
the adapter itself is just god awful.
Well, so that's actually a good point. We sell a cable, by the way, on our website. If you have a Corsair fully modular power supply Type 4 or Type 3, you can use the PCI Express direct GPU cable we sell on the website. So I think it's sold out within seconds right away, but we're always getting more of them. But if you have a Founders Edition 3080 or 3090 or one of the Founders Edition cards from NVIDIA, and you want a 12-pin cable that goes direct to your power supply instead of having that little ugly adapter that hangs out about halfway, we do sell that cable. So that's something that you guys can get from us right away. I think that that's actually something that a couple other people have mentioned, but it's actually more difficult than people realize because it's not the standard kind of microfit 12-pin that a lot of people thought it was. It's actually something very different. And so there were actually a limited number of guys who got their cable certified by NVIDIA at launch, right? Everyone said, oh, we have this 12-pin cable, it's ready to go. And it turns out that they were going based on what they thought was the PCIe spec, but NVIDIA had kind of a slightly different spec on that and different load requirements. So be very, very cautious. Make sure that if you're going to go buy a direct 12-pin cable, that you know that it's been certified to work with that card. We've seen a couple of even OEM vendors and stuff talk about how it's not working out or anything. Chris, any other cool questions coming in?
Let's see. I saw a question earlier. This goes back to graphics card cooling. Vertical or horizontal from performance? What gets you the most performance?
Okay, yeah. So horizontal, the standard, if you see most builds are just going to be plugged straight in the PCI slot. That standard horizontal orientation is typically ideal. And the reason why is because there's nothing below it, right? And you're getting fresh air typically unhindered from the front of the case. And if that case has great airflow, use the Corsair 4000D airflow, for example. That's the one I've been using for all my graphics card tests for that very reason. I don't want to, hurt any of my card's performances. I want them to have as much air as possible without being unreasonable. In fact, I only used the two stock fans in that case. I didn't add like 6 or whatever. Like the 2 in there do enough because the case is just it just breathes so easily. But if you get at least that one fan blowing air directly under the card, that card's going to pull that air into the fin stack and, well, sometimes exhausted out the rear, but usually just kind of gets vented into the case again. And from there, your exhaust fans will take care of it. But it is one of those things that, like, you have to be careful because a lot of cases, and even some Corsair cases do this too, and I think people misunderstand what they're for. So you can mount an air-cooled card in those vertical slots that some cases have, but you're going to have those fans pressed right against the glass typically, right? And if it's not right against the glass, there's maybe an inch to spare. You're hindering airflow at that point. You'll see temperature jumps as a result. Might not be substantial, but still something to keep in mind. What those are for usually is for like water blocks. So if you're using like a HydroX kit, you have a 3080 with a water block on it. You can mount that up front. It's a closed system. It doesn't need to breathe there. It's okay being against the glass. Heck, the entire board is against a block, so to speak. It's nickel plated. Forget what you guys use, nickel plated blocks. But so the right against the glass there, usually only recommended you stick with custom cooled cards. And then if you want to use like a third-party adapter, there are some that will kind of sit in place of where the PCI slots would be. Problem there is you're, cutting off your access to the other PCI slots by inserting a bracket there. But that pushes the card significantly closer to the motherboard, and that gives it almost as much space front to back as you were going to have top to bottom if you inserted it in the uppermost 16-lane slot. The only question there is if you're using like a 3080 Founders Edition and that fan is effectively blowing air straight through onto your chipset. Like if you're using like a X570 chipset, is that going to, overheat your chipset? I don't think so. I haven't tested that exact scenario. It seems to be something people are concerned about on Reddit, but it's a very specific scenario. And let's be honest, I don't think many people have 3080 Founders Edition cards right now. So I wouldn't be too worried about it.
Okay. Chris, what other questions we have going on?
Let's see. So with new RX 6000 series cards coming out, are we going to see some HydroX series blocks for them?
Oh, that's a good question. So we did announce the RTX 30 series blocks that we're doing for the NVIDIA Founders Edition cards, and there's some more SKUs that we're working on as well for those. So the NVIDIA blocks we have in development, and they should be available soon on the website. A couple of them were already up there. I think the RX 6000 blocks is something that we are going to pay attention. We can't discuss unannounced products, but tomorrow is the announce date for the cards. And I would expect that you'll see some thermal need for them. It's 320 or something watts TDP on the top end SKU according to AMD's own data. So when we see the 6800 and the 6900 thermal benchmarks and the power load benchmarks, I think you'll see a solid demand for that. So I would, without saying yes or no, I would expect that you would see something at some point from us to address whatever the consumer concerns are. If consumer concerns are, wow, this thing runs really hot and that air-cooled heatsink is really struggling, then water cool it. HydroX is a great solution to cool your GPU. It saves space, it's more efficient, it's quieter. There's really no reason not to do a HydroX build. And then what else do we have, Chris? Anything else?
I see a couple case-related questions. Kind of touching on HydroX, what's the smallest case that could house a HydroX loop?
Ooh. Well, I mean, if you're clever. We've done a 280X. We did a micro ATX 280X with the XD3, the little tiny pump res thing that we do. So we've done that. You could do it in a 280X. I'll be quite honest, it's kind of a pain. It's the smaller form factor you have, the harder custom cooling becomes, especially if you're doing hard tubing. I would recommend something as like 465X or 4000D sized is kind of the smallest I would personally do it in because I have giant, oven mitt sized hands. I don't have delicate, nimble ballerina fingers. So if you have excellent dexterity, 220T, anything is possible.
I've
with
done
the
that.
XT3.
It's tough.
It is tough. But
I actually ended up doing a 220T build because of yours, Greg.
Oh, how did it go?
Yeah, it came out all right.
How'd you mount the reservoir? Because that's where you have to get fancy.
Oh, I'll have to show you pictures later.
Okay. Yeah, I have you have to get very particular with where that thing goes, or use like a very small card because the problem is that case isn't very like big front to back, right? So the graphics card usually gets in the way in that case. It just requires some intuitive engineering.
Yeah.
Intuitive is a good word to put. What else you got, Chris?
Let's see. Cases for high airflow. What would we say would be our go-tos as far as cases for the new graphics cards?
I think
mean-
the original Corsair C70 from 2012, that's personally the best high airflow case. You can fit 10 120
Absolute
millimeter
wind tunnel.
fans in it. It's made of steel on all sides.
And those
I
latches.
might be a little bit biased because I designed it, but it is, in my opinion. No, I'm just kidding. The 4000D airflow is absolutely the best high airflow case I think we have right now.
Yeah.
If you don't want the physical size of the 4000, which is a little bit bigger than our 220T, the 220T airflow is really, really good as well. But the 4000D is just a little bit better cable management room. It's got kind of some creature comfort stuff like the cable routing is a little bit better. It says better layout for cooling. I think the 4000D airflow is the case that I did personally choose to build my system in. In fact, that's what this is right here, is a 4000D airflow. We'll talk about that when it comes to systems because this is a Vengeance PC. But this is the 4000D airflow right here that's been my co-star. And as you've noticed, very quiet. It has not been.
And it's
making a lot of noise.
affordable. It's affordable. That's the best part about it, in my
Yes.
opinion. Is that it's
$79
not
bucks,
like
yeah.
crazy expensive. Yeah, it's awesome. So
Yeah, it's the only question is, can you actually find one in stock? Because they sold out way faster than we thought.
I noticed that. I went through to link them and I noticed that on Amazon they were stretched pretty thin there. I was
Right.
like, wow,
No, I
these
mean,
are doing pretty well.
It's a great problem to have. You guys liked it so
Yeah.
much, you bought all of them. Thanks, guys. That's awesome. But it would be nice for the 5,000 or 10,000 guys a month that don't have one that want one, or whatever, how many it is. I don't know the numbers. But it's there's a bunch of guys who would like to buy this that can't because it's sold out right away. So we're making them as fast as we can, like everything is right now. All right, what else we got, Chris? Hey, in fact, you know what? Let's give away a 4000 since we can't sell it. Why don't we give it to somebody? Alan, how do we want to? We have two of them. How do we want to give them away, Chris? Are we just going to give them away to questions? The people ask good questions.
Give me 1 second while I confirm that.
All right. Well, let's
Make them answer a question in the chat or something. Like, make 'em-
All right.
Oh, are we gonna do like a trivia question?
Should we do a trivia
yeah,
question?
trivia question. Yeah.
All right.
that's good.
Let's do a trivia question. All right.
You're the vault of all Corsair knowledge,
Oh,
George. Go
Jesus.
for it.
All right. What was Corsair's first kit or first PC case? What was the first case we ever launched? And the first person to post it in the chat wins a free 4000D airflow. Anybody can. So I know the chat's on my side. The chat's a few seconds behind, so we're going to wait and see. Obviously, the answer I know it because I launched it and designed it. So, and by the way, it was a great case for 2009 when we launched it. Not so good a case today. Almost every case in our lineup is better than this one today. But I saw somebody
I saw
posted
it.
it. Pimp SLI
Yep.
with the 800D. Pimp SLI. That's a.
I'll be honest. I didn't know the answer to that one. I was
No, it's-
thinking about it. I wasn't even doing this back then. But
Greg, what were you, like 11 when that happened? Come on.
oh, dude, yeah, I was 2009. I was freshman in high school.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was here. I've been here forever. I am going to be here probably forever. So we'll see. But no, yeah, 800D is the first case. It was all steel, big giant monolith black thing. And actually, the 4000D is very similar design. So give a price to that guy. Let's say we got to give another one of these away. We get another 4000D away. Let's see, another trivia question for somebody. All right, we'll do first. We did a first already. All right, we launched 2 keyboards last month. What is the name of one of them?
I'm using
Good
one.
one.
Yeah. I don't care which one you name. You can, well, technically it's more than 2 because there's variants of it. But if you can name one of the 2 keyboards we launched last month, you can win a free case. Just to see if people actually remember the names of the keyboards. They're, very clever. Ooh, someone came close but got it wrong.
Yep.
Let's see. Ooh.
Oh, 2 people said that. There it is.
Non-YTM, K100 RGB. Whoever non-YTM wins it.
Yep.
Oh, now everyone's typing K100. Like, copy paste. All right. The other one was the K60, the K60 and K60 Pro. Those are really cool keyboards you guys should check out as well. Those keyboards are awesome. K100 is our new flagship. It's amazing. Has a cool IQ jog dial on it. Really cool.
Is that the optical
switch.
one?
Yeah, optical
optical,
switches.
Yeah,
Really,
you can get
really
optical
cool keyboard.
switches or cherries.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's a really nice keyboard. I like the K100 a lot. I like the K60 a lot too. It has the new Cherry MX, what they call it, MX Viola or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, Viola switches.
Viola switches. Those are really, really good switches, and they're affordable too. So you don't have to spend $200 on a keyboard if you don't want to. So I like the K60 a lot, especially the super small footprint layout. I think that's really cool. A lot of the mechanical keyboard guys, I know that the mechanical keyboard subreddit hates us. But hey, we went to standard bottom row. We launched the K60, which has a smaller footprint. We're on our path, guys. We're trying. We're doing our best to bring the Reddit R mechanical keyboards on board. So I think we're moving in the right direction. That's the K100 page. It looks awesome. I think that the team that did it deserves a good credit because that keyboard is amazing. What else do we have to give away? Let's take a look at the list. We have a couple power supplies.
Yeah, power supply would be good.
Oh, so we were talking about, by the way, speaking of things that are hard to buy right now, power supplies are selling out just about everywhere. We have a couple of power supplies to give away. Alan, so should we do some trivia questions for the power supplies too? We good? All right. So let's see. Since it's a power supply question, what is the first power supply that Corsair launched, the first family of power supplies that Corsair launched? It's a trick question. Not a trick question. There's 2 power supplies, but there's a family. So what was the first power supply? Either one of the first 2 power supplies. They were launched at the same time. Either one of them you guys can get. I will give you a hint. It was 2006, so it's a long time ago. It's 14 years ago. Probably most of the chat was like in elementary school when this happened. We launched CXF RGB earlier, but that was this year. That's relatively recent. Whoa, hey, James Angel. 620HX, I'll give him that. That's a HX620, HX620, HX520. First 2 power supplies we launched. I was here around there for that, so that was good. That was back when we had different colors for each wattage, but now we have too many SKUs for that, and we can't do IQ labels. So we can't adjust the 16.8 million colors.
What year was that? How long ago
2006. That was
6.
14 years ago.
Wow.
So that was when we were kind of small enough where someone said, hey guys, should we do power supplies? And I said, yeah. And then it was like, okay, now you're in charge of power supplies. So that was like, it was an interesting company at that point, sure. Luckily, that's not changed really at all. You have a good idea, now it's your responsibility. Good luck. We have another power supply to give away. Let's talk about something else. We launched a couple of headsets last month too. Anybody want to mention any of the new headsets we launched last month? You can get a power supply for that too. We'll give another power supply to the guy who came up with the name of one of the headsets we launched last month. All right, I'm waiting.
People's streams are like lagging because
yeah,
some
they're a
people
little
are
behind.
still-
Well, I think there's a 20 to 30 second lag here. So I'm not going to give all the credit to guys who know the lore of Corsair. The next questions will be something that's more generic and not, you have to have been a fan for 20 years or something like that. So somebody said, what do we have? Chris, you see it in the chat yet? Oh, someone said HS60 haptic. I saw it.
Yeah, chat just kind of exploded on me.
Yeah, Spencer Payne. See the first?
I see the HS60 or H60 happening. Close enough. Alan, go through there and figure out who it was on the chat. We'll figure that out. All right, let's do a couple other. We have a couple more prizes before the last few minutes here. A 3-pack of QL series fans. That sounds pretty rad. And we have a couple of coolers. All right, so we talked a little bit about this before. If you've been watching since the beginning of the stream, which CPU did AMD leave out of the lineup this generation? Which one did they not replace? They have a 3000 series and a 5000 series. One of the SKUs did not get a direct replacement. If you can name which one it is, you get a free Elite Capellix liquid cooler. So that's a good one. That'll fit to that.
Really good.
Oh, somebody said it. 3700X from Olaf only. 3700X did not get a replacement. You're right. There was no 5700X, so Olaf only wins a special prize. Awesome for that one. And let's see. We need one more hydro cooler to give away. Chris, any questions you got? Do you think about trivia questions?
Uh,
Or Greg, you got anything?
Ooh.
I know, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, I feel like
Put you on the
now I know
spot.
what he feels
In the
like.
weeds. All right. I'll give another. Here's another one. Let's go with something more. Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Some of you guys have played this game. It came out last week. Some of you guys are stoked about it. What's the main character's name by default?
Ooh.
First person to post it gets an Elite Capellix cooler. It's completely unrelated to us, and I don't even know if we're going to get in trouble with Ubisoft if we do it. Maybe they'll send me a Nastagram or something. But if you can name the main character in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you win Elite Capellix cooler.
I don't know the answer to this, but I'm seeing names.
Yep. One name in particular. I think that's Eivor. E-I-V-O-R.
Yep. Whoever is the first guy to say Ivor, I think Digital Phoenix or something says it. So good credit for him. I wanted to give some credit to somebody who knew something that wasn't Corsair specific, so there you go on that. So that is the main character's name on that. It's a pretty fun game. If you guys haven't had a chance to play it, if you like any of the Assassin's Creed games, it's pretty fun so far. Black Flag is my personal favorite because of pirate ship stuff. So that's kind of my deal. But
That's very on brand, George.
well, look, I'm not going to say that the company came around to my pirate fixation, but we do have a sales logo, so there's that. Okay, we have, let's see, a couple of fan kits, 3 fan kits to go away. I know that there's a slight stream lag. Sorry, guys. Let's see what else we got going on. So Digital Phoenix, you did win something, yes. And if you have, let's see, there is a famous plane from World War II named after our company, which was kind of them to do 50 years before the company existed. What is the numeric designation of it? Like there's an F-15 fighter, there's a A-10 Warthog or A-10 Thunderbolt. There's a numerical aspect to the Corsair plane from World War II. It is the blank, 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 3 digits, letters and numbers. If you post that in the chat, F4U, Red One Monster, F4U Corsair, you win a pack of 3 QL fans. Getting into the deep cuts.
Wow.
Getting into the deep cuts. F4U Corsair is correct. That's a pretty good one right there. Okay, let's see. What other weeds kind of commentary can we get into here? All right. Dominator Platinum RGB memory has a very specific type of LED in it. It was installed first in that product, and we have a brand name for it. They are smaller, more power efficient, and brighter per watt than standard micro LEDs. What do we call that LED technology? Does anybody know what that's called? It's on Dominator Platinum LED Dominator Platinum RGB, and also the K55 wireless, I believe. Chris?
It's on a K57.
K57 wireless, sorry, my mistake. Capellix, who says Capellix first?
Oh, is that where the
Spelled it right.
AIO name comes from?
Yeah.
Yes, that's where the
I did
name
not
came
know
from.
that.
Manuel Latner is the first. Oh, no. Someone said Capellix but spelled it wrong. Someone said Capellini. I think that's a type of pasta. Capellix.
good.
Manuel Latner got it correct the first, so he gets a pack of, ironically, fans that don't have Capellix LEDs in them. But the Elite Capellix cooler has Capellix LEDs in it because they're smaller and more power efficient, so we can put them on the pump cap, and we can put more of them in that same physical space, create better lighting without adding heat to the pump cap, which is a critical place not to put light.
So does the AIO, does the Capellix AIO have Capellix LEDs?
It does.
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah, on the pump head, there's like, what was it, 33?
33?
Yes. Sure.
It was really bright.
I
I noticed how
honestly don't
bright it was.
remember.
And it was well diffused too. Like the
Yeah.
LEDs looked good. Sorry about that. That's my phone. The LEDs look really nicely diffused. I just don't like it when they're like, blotchy, like light clumps, and then there's like kind of darker space in between them. I love it when it's diffused beautifully. And no, that makes sense now. I get it.
Yeah. So Capellix, by the way, I believe was named after a star, if I remember right, because getting things named now is difficult because every good name has been taken. So you basically have to create a word or just steal something from Latin. So anyway, I think we have one last prize to give away. So let's do one last trivia question. Let's see here. We have talked about this before. All right. What should we talk about for this one? Okay. We talked earlier in the call about something that AMD currently has on the AM4 platform for the Ryzen CPUs that Intel will not have at all for this year, and probably will have to have somewhere through next year. It is a type of performance improvement that is affecting specifically storage and that bus. What is that technology that we called? What iteration of that technology is it? Anybody that can name it will win the last pack of QL Finds, which ironically also don't use that bus. No. There's a lot of
They're
people
saying Sam.
They're saying Sam. Whoa. Someone
see
said
it.
it. I saw it.
It was
Bob
like
Bill.
Bob Bill.
Bob Bill, PCI Express 4.0. Everyone said Sam. We did talk about Sam a lot, but Sam was not the technology specifically. That is something that that is a PCI spec. But PCIe Gen 4 is something Intel does not have today that AMD does have. Sam is kind of, it is technically close to correct, but it's not.
This doesn't affect
specifically.
for like storage, does it?
Right,
It
it's
doesn't
not really a
affect
storage thing. It's close. Random access storage versus.
I get, yeah.
I
can
get
see how
where
they confuse it.
that's probably
Yeah.
my fault for not asking it as.
No,
as
that's good.
specifically as
Make
I
it
could have been.
tricky. I mean,
But,
it's a tricky question.
All right,
That's
I'm
the
going to give
point.
Bob Bill the credit anyway because I can do that and nobody's going to enforce the rules except me. So, thumbs up. So anyway, I wanted to say thank you, Greg, for taking the time today. You guys check out Greg's channel. Greg's channel is awesome. Go subscribe to it right now and watch every video he posts. There's few tech tubers in the world who actually are putting the effort and time into creating really good content instead of just glorified unboxings, and Greg's channel has one of those really good datas. So if you need to see someone besides Stephen Burke once in a while, then Greg is a good plan B.
That's a tough comparison. Ooh, yeah,
And I
Steve
will
Burke's up there.
also give a shout out to Paul and Kyle and Linus and those guys. They're all right if you like that sort of thing where you have personality and intellect at the same time. Who has the patience for that? So anyway, thank you, Greg, for being on the stream. Thank you
Thanks
guys
for
for
having
watching
me.
the stream. We are going to be doing this more regularly. We're going to be doing this probably every month for here on out. So if you guys have suggestions or topics, post them in the comments. We're going to be reading through the comments of this YouTube video for like the next month, trying to figure out what we did right, what we did wrong, how to make it better every time. So if you have suggestions, you want to see certain specific things talked about, you want to request certain types of prizes or whatever, put them in the comments. We'll take a look at the comments on the YouTube channel, and we'll interact with you guys. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.